Like when you went and invested $50,000 without telling me?
Oh, damn.
I did inform her.
Jenny thinks the worst part of the cafe failure is finally behind them, but one piece of paper changes the mood inside their home before either of them has time to prepare for what comes next. The court notice does not ask for an explanation, sympathy, or another family conversation. Someone wants money returned, and the person demanding repayment is tied directly to Sumit's own family, turning an old business failure into a fresh problem with consequences neither Jenny nor Sumit expected to face. For Jenny, the cafe already represents enough disappointment. Money went in, hopes went up, and the business never became the stable future they wanted. She has spent enough time wondering what went wrong, so her focus has shifted towards something simpler, a home that feels secure, finances that stop changing without warning, and a marriage where every difficult decision does not somehow lead back to another family argument. Sumit wants peace too, though his idea of peace has always involved keeping tension low between Jenny and the people closest to him. The notice destroys that fragile calm because the wording carries a claim Jenny never believed she would hear. Money provided during the cafe venture was not family support, according to the relative behind the demand. They say the money was a loan and repayment was always expected. Jenny reads the claim again because the distinction matters more than a single word suggests. Family help sounds like support given during a difficult period. A loan means an obligation, a promise, and possibly a financial burden following them long after the cafe closed. Jenny remembers the situation differently. From her perspective, the money came during a period when everyone knew the business needed support, and she never understood there was a formal debt hanging over their future. Her frustration rises fast because she feels as though the meaning of an old agreement has changed after the business failed. Yet while Jenny speaks with certainty, Sumit does not react with the same confidence, and his hesitation begins to bother her almost as much as the court notice itself. She watches him closely, because after everything they have been through, Jenny knows when Sumit is uncomfortable. He does not immediately say the relative is wrong. He does not dismiss the demand as nonsense. Instead, he seems caught between defending his family and explaining something Jenny has not heard before. That small shift in his behavior changes the entire atmosphere because Jenny starts wondering whether Sumit remembers conversations surrounding the money differently from the way she remembers them. The financial issue hits Jenny in a place far deeper than the cafe. For years, she has wanted fewer surprises involving Sumit's family, not more of them. She has already dealt with uncertainty, resistance, waiting, compromise, and the emotional strain of trying to build a marriage while family acceptance stayed complicated. Now, a business failure she believed was finished is pulling the same family tension back into their lives. Except this time the disagreement is no longer happening around a dining table or during an emotional argument. Court papers are sitting in front of them. That difference scares her because family pressure is one thing when everyone is arguing about feelings, loyalty, or approval. Money changes the stakes. Jenny starts thinking about what repayment would mean, where the money would come from, and why she was never told there was a possibility the cafe funding would return as a personal demand. Sumit tries to keep the situation from becoming another conflict between Jenny and his relatives, but even his attempt to calm things down starts working against him because Jenny wants facts, not reassurance. Then the relative points toward handwritten notes connected to the cafe funding, and the situation becomes harder to dismiss. The notes suggest repayment would happen after the business became profitable, which gives the family a reason to argue that returning the money was always part of the understanding. Yet the cafe never reached the success everyone hoped for, and there is still no formal loan agreement in front of Jenny. There is no detailed repayment schedule, no structured contract, and nothing she remembers signing that turned family assistance into a personal financial obligation. That gives Jenny a small amount of confidence because handwritten notes are not the same thing as a complete agreement, and she starts questioning how anyone expects repayment when the condition mentioned in those notes never happened. The cafe did not become profitable. The business failed. From her point of view, demanding money now feels less like completing an old arrangement and more like changing the rules after everyone already knows the ending. Sumit still does not give her the reaction she wants, and that growing uncertainty starts moving Jenny's attention away from the relative and toward her own husband. She presses him on whether there was ever a direct promise to repay the money, because if the answer is no, she wants him to say so without hesitation. This is where Sumit finally admits there were conversations with his family about returning the money, conversations Jenny never saw and never knew existed while the cafe was operating. The admission hits harder than the original notice because Jenny suddenly understands there are two disputes happening at the same time. One involves the relative asking for money. The other involves information Sumit kept separate from her while they were building the same business and sharing the same financial risk. Jenny no longer knows what language Sumit used, what expectations his family formed from those conversations, or whether he said something that now gives the relative more confidence in court. Sumit explains that family discussions around money were complicated and that he did not view every conversation as a formal agreement, but Jenny has already moved past the point where a simple explanation settles her nerves. She wants to know what was said when it was said and why she was kept outside conversations involving money connected to a business, carrying consequences for both of them. The more Sumit tries to separate private family discussions from legal responsibility, the more Jenny worries those private discussions are exactly what the court will want to see. By the time Jenny looks at the notice again, her fear has changed completely. At first, she worried about the amount being demanded and whether the failed cafe would cost them even more money. Now the number matters less than the hidden conversations behind the claim, because if Sumit discussed repayment without telling her, she has no idea what promises exist in messages she has never read. And for Jenny, the most frightening part is no longer the relative asking for money. It is the possibility that the court is about to show her exactly what Sumit said when she was not there. Jenny walks into court carrying one belief she refuses to let go of. If Sumit's relative wants repayment, then someone needs to prove a real loan existed, because from Jenny's point of view, family support does not suddenly become debt after a business fails. Her confidence comes from the missing pieces. There is no signed loan contract, no interest rate, no repayment calendar, and no clear date showing when Sumit was supposed to return the money. To Jenny, those gaps matter because the entire claim rests on an understanding she says was never explained to her. Her side starts pressing those weaknesses almost immediately, and for the first time since the notice arrived, Jenny seems calmer. The questions are simple enough for anyone listening to follow. Where is the signed agreement? There is none. Where is the repayment schedule? None exists. Was interest discussed? No clear record appears. When was the full amount supposed to be returned? No firm deadline exists. Every missing answer gives Jenny another reason to believe the family is trying to turn informal support into something far more serious after the cafe collapsed. But once Sumit's relative begins explaining their side, the dispute stops looking as simple as Jenny hoped. According to the family's position, money was provided because they wanted Sumit to become financially independent through the cafe. They were willing to help him get started, yet they never viewed the money as something meant to disappear forever. From their perspective, helping a family member does not always mean giving away money with no expectation of repayment. They believed Sumit understood he would return what he received once the business became stable enough. And this is where the courtroom becomes uncomfortable in a different way, because both sides describe the same money through completely different memories. Jenny hears family interference dressed up as financial responsibility. The relative sees support followed by an obligation. Sumit sits between those two versions, knowing both sides are talking about conversations he lived through while also knowing Jenny never heard every part of them. For Jenny, the deeper frustration comes from how familiar this position feels. Once again, she finds herself trying to understand an agreement involving Sumit's family after the consequences have already reached her marriage. She does not deny the cafe needed help. She does not pretend the business succeeded. What she refuses to accept is the idea of being expected to live with financial promises she never knew existed. The relative keeps returning to one point. Sumit understood repayment was expected once the cafe started making money. Jenny's side pushes back by focusing on what never happened. The cafe never became profitable in the way everyone hoped, so even the handwritten notes mentioned earlier leave room for disagreement. If repayment depended on success, Jenny wants to know why failure now triggers a personal demand. Then she notices Sumit. He is not looking relaxed anymore. Each time someone asks about old conversations, his posture shifts. He avoids Jenny's eyes more than once, and his answers become careful in a way she immediately recognizes. Jenny has spent enough time with Sumit to know when he is trying to choose every word before speaking, and watching him become nervous sends her attention away from the legal argument and straight toward whatever he has not told her. The questions move from handwritten notes toward private conversations between Sumit and his family. Jenny listens closely because this is the area she fears most. She already knows discussions happened without her. What she still does not know is what Sumit promised inside those conversations. Then the WhatsApp exchange appears. The words are simple, but their effect on Jenny is immediate. Sumit wrote that when the business started working, he would return everything. Jenny stares at the message because she has never seen those words before. For several seconds, the courtroom dispute about contracts and repayment terms almost becomes secondary. Jenny is no longer focused only on whether one WhatsApp message creates a legal obligation. She is looking at her husband and trying to understand why he promised repayment while she remained unaware of the promise. The sentence bothers her because Sumit did not write something vague about helping later. He spoke about returning everything, and Jenny hears commitment in those words whether Sumit intended a formal promise or not. From her perspective, this message explains why the family believed repayment was coming, even if no traditional loan paperwork exists. Sumit tries to explain the meaning from his side. He says his words came from respect toward family, not from a formal business arrangement. In his mind, telling relatives he would repay them someday was an expression of responsibility and gratitude. He did not believe a respectful family message transformed informal assistance into a structured loan with fixed terms. Jenny understands what Sumit is saying, but she does not accept the distinction emotionally. Her concern is simple. If Sumit felt responsible enough to promise repayment, then why did he never tell his wife about the promise? The business affected both of them. The failure affected both of them. Now the court case is affecting both of them. Yet the conversation creating expectations around repayment happened without her knowledge. Sumit feels cornered because, from his perspective, he was trying to handle his own family responsibility without creating another fight at home. He believed he was keeping pressure away from Jenny, not placing new pressure on her. Jenny hears the same explanation in a completely different way. Keeping information away from her did not protect her. Instead, the silence allowed expectations to grow until everyone ended up discussing them in court. Their disagreement becomes sharper because neither side sounds completely unreasonable. Sumit sees family duty and respectful language. Jenny sees a financial promise with consequences she never agreed to carry. The relative sees evidence confirming their memory of the arrangement. And now the court has to decide whether those words prove enough to support a real loan claim. Jenny keeps returning to the message in her mind because every part of the case now feels different. Earlier, she believed the lack of formal paperwork placed the family on weak ground. After seeing Sumit's own words, she knows the dispute has become harder to dismiss, even though plenty of legal questions still remain unanswered. She looks towards Sumit again, and the disappointment on her face says more than another argument would. The biggest problem is no longer one old message. The bigger problem is trust. If one promise stayed hidden for this long, Jenny starts wondering what else was discussed when she was not included. Before she gets an answer, the family representative introduces another turn. The WhatsApp exchange, they say, is not the strongest evidence supporting their position. There is another document connected to the café, and this time the problem reaches much closer to Jenny than she expects. Because her name appears on the document. Jenny entered the courtroom worried about Sumit's promise to his family, but the moment a café-related account appeared with her own name attached, the entire case changed for her. Until then, she believed Sumit carried the greatest financial danger because his message contained the promise to return the money. Now she was looking at a document connecting her to the failed business, and the anger she had carried into court started giving way to something far harder to control.
Fear.
Jenny had already spent years fighting for stability in a relationship surrounded by uncertainty. She had relocated, waded through resistance from Sumit's family, lived through periods where acceptance seemed close and then slipped away again, and kept choosing the marriage even when life around it felt unsettled. None of those choices meant she regretted loving Sumit, but every compromise had taken something from her, and financial security had become one of the few areas where she wanted fewer surprises rather than more promises she learned about later. The failed cafe had already taken enough from them emotionally. Jenny believed the business was finished. The losses were painful, and whatever disappointment remained would slowly become part of their past. Seeing her name on an account connected with the cafe made the past feel active again. The business was no longer a memory involving lost money and failed plans. It was sitting in front of a judge, surrounded by questions about responsibility, repayment, and whether Jenny herself belonged inside the claim. Her first reaction was confusion because she wanted to know exactly what her name meant on the document. A name appearing on a business-related account did not automatically prove she personally borrowed money from Sumit's relative. The court still needed evidence connecting Jenny to the alleged loan itself. There had to be something showing she understood the money as debt, agreed to repayment, or took part in an arrangement creating personal responsibility. Without that connection, the account raised questions, but it did not settle them. Jenny understood enough to know the distinction mattered, yet legal logic did little to calm what was happening between her and Sumit. She turned toward him because one thought pushed ahead of everything else. When had her name become part of this financial arrangement, and why was she learning about the connection while sitting in court? Sumit tried to explain the account, but his hesitation made the moment worse. He seemed to search for words while Jenny watched him closely, and every pause added another layer of doubt. She had already learned about one WhatsApp message he never showed her. Now another document had surfaced, this time carrying her name, and Sumit once again looked like someone trying to explain information after the consequences had arrived. For Jenny, the hesitation hurt more than the paper itself, because paperwork still allowed room for legal argument. Sumit's reaction felt personal. She needed him to speak with confidence and tell her exactly why her name appeared there. Instead, his uncertainty left her wondering whether he had made another decision involving the cafe without fully explaining the financial meaning to her. The family's position became firmer once Jenny's connection to the account entered the discussion. Their argument was straightforward. Jenny had been connected to the cafe project. She stood to benefit if the business succeeded, and they believed she should not separate herself from the financial consequences simply because the venture failed. From their perspective, accepting the upside of a family-supported business while rejecting every obligation after failure did not feel fair. That argument landed hard because it gave the dispute a moral layer beyond paperwork. The relative was not only asking whether Jenny signed a formal loan. They were arguing that she participated in a project funded partly through family money and therefore shared some responsibility for what happened afterward. To them, the cafe was meant to help Jenny and Sumit build a more independent future together, so Jenny's involvement in the business mattered. Jenny's side pushed back with an equally important point. Benefiting from a business was not the same as agreeing to borrow money from a relative. Her name on an account did not show she promised repayment. There was still no signed loan agreement carrying Jenny's consent, no message from Jenny saying she would return the money, and no clear evidence showing she accepted personal responsibility for the amount being demanded. The difference between those two positions became the heart of the argument. The family focused on participation and benefit. Jenny focused on knowledge and consent. Somewhere between those ideas sat Sumit, looking increasingly uncomfortable as every question moved closer to his wife. Jenny was asked about what she knew when the cafe received financial help, and her answers carried frustration because she kept returning to the same point. She understood the money as support connected to the business. She did not understand herself to be entering a personal loan agreement with Sumit's relative. If Sumit had separate conversations about repayment, those conversations had happened without her. Watching Jenny answer those questions seemed to change something in Sumit. Until this point, he had spent much of the dispute trying to stand between his family and his wife without pushing either side too far. He understood why his relatives believed money should come back, and he understood why Jenny felt blindsided by promises she never saw. His instinct had been to explain, soften, and keep the conflict from becoming another family rupture. But once Jenny's own financial exposure became the focus, Sumit stopped trying to balance everyone's feelings. He made his position clear. If the court eventually decided repayment was his responsibility, he wanted that responsibility placed on him rather than Jenny. He had been the person communicating with his family. He had written the WhatsApp message about returning the money. He believed any obligation created through those conversations belonged with him. The change mattered because Jenny had spent much of the case wondering whether Sumit would keep protecting family peace even while she faced consequences from agreements she never understood. Now he was openly drawing a line around her involvement and telling the court she should not carry a burden created through his conversations. The family resisted his position because they believed Jenny had benefited from the cafe and could not erase her connection after the venture failed. From their perspective, Sumit taking responsibility did not change the history of the business or Jenny's name appearing on the account. Sumit still pushed back. For once, his priority was no longer avoiding another confrontation between Jenny and his relatives. He wanted the question of his wife's liability separated from whatever promise he had made. Jenny listened, and the moment should have brought relief. Instead, it brought another painful realization. If Sumit believed the responsibility was his from the beginning, why had she been pulled this far into the problem before hearing him say it so firmly? Her frustration came out in the line, holding everything together. Then why am I sitting in court? The question was about far more than a courtroom seat. Jenny was asking why she kept becoming part of consequences linked to conversations she never heard, expectations she never agreed to, and promises Sumit believed he could manage privately until they reached both of them. Sumit had no simple answer because every explanation returned to the same mistake. He thought handling his family himself would protect Jenny from more tension. Instead, the hidden conversations had brought her into a legal dispute where her own financial security was being questioned. By this point, the case against Sumit looked more serious than it had when the hearing began. His WhatsApp message gave the family something concrete to point toward, and the handwritten notes supported their claim that repayment had been discussed. The question surrounding Jenny was different. Her name on the cafe-related account connected her to the business, but the court still had to decide whether that connection reached far enough to make her personally responsible for the alleged debt. Jenny sat waiting for the judge to address her position, carrying a fear she had not felt when she first entered the room. She no longer cared only about whether Sumit's relative would win the broader claim. She needed to know whether one failed cafe, one hidden promise, and one account bearing her name were enough to place a debt on her shoulders. The family had produced evidence tying Sumit to repayment discussions. What nobody knew yet was whether they had produced enough to tie Jenny to the debt. The judge's ruling gives Jenny the first sense of relief she has felt since the court notice arrived, but the relief comes with limits, and those limits matter. The court is not ready to decide whether the family money formed a legally enforceable loan because too many pieces remain unclear. There is no formal agreement spelling out repayment terms, no fixed interest, no clear deadline, and no signed contract defining what everyone accepted when the cafe received the money. At the same time, Sumit's private messages prevent the dispute from ending cleanly because his own words suggest he understood some form of repayment was expected once the business started working. For Jenny, the most important part comes when the judge turns to her personal position. The evidence connecting her directly to the alleged loan is not strong enough at this stage. Her name appears on a cafe-related account, but the family has not shown enough proof that Jenny herself agreed to borrow money, accepted repayment terms, or made a personal promise to return the amount. Because of those gaps, she is temporarily removed from part of the claim while the larger dispute around Sumit and the family money continues. Jenny hears the decision and, for one brief moment, her face softens. The fear of being personally trapped by a debt she says she never accepted begins to loosen. She has spent the hearing listening to old messages, handwritten notes, family interpretations, and questions about a business already buried under disappointment. Now, at least one part of the pressure has moved away from her. But relief does not become happiness. The moment Jenny steps outside the courtroom, the legal victory feels smaller than she expected because another problem has already taken its place. She is no longer thinking mainly about whether the relative will recover money. She is thinking about Sumit, about the conversations he kept private, and about how close those conversations came to placing her inside a financial dispute she never understood. Jenny does not celebrate. She turns towards Sumit with the kind of frustration that no court ruling settles. For her, the debt has become secondary. The deeper issue is the pattern behind the debt. Sumit had conversations about repayment. He wrote messages suggesting money would be returned. He allowed family expectations to develop around the cafe. Jenny learned about those promises only after the disagreement reached court and began threatening her own security. That is what hurts. Jenny explains that she does not want to keep finding out about important decisions after those decisions become problems. She does not want another document, another message, or another family expectation appearing months later and forcing her to deal with consequences she never had a chance to discuss with her husband. Sumit listens, and his defense is quieter now because the courtroom has already exposed the weakness in the way he handled the situation. He admits he wanted to deal with his family himself. In his mind, every conversation did not need to become another discussion between Jenny and his relatives. He believed keeping certain details away from her would prevent more tension and stop another argument from entering their home. That explanation makes sense from Sumit's point of view. For years, he has lived between people he loves who do not always see each other with trust or patience. Every disagreement carries history. Every family decision feels larger because old wounds sit underneath new conversations. Sumit has learned to soften messages, delay difficult discussions, and handle pressure privately because direct confrontation often seems to make everything worse. His instinct has become simple. Keep everyone calm for as long as possible. The problem is that calm built on missing information never lasts. Jenny sees the results standing right in front of them. Sumit believed silence would prevent conflict, but silence allowed the conflict to grow without her knowledge. By the time she learned what had been said, the matter had moved beyond a family disagreement and into a courtroom. What Sumit treated as temporary protection became another reason for Jenny to question whether she knows the full story behind decisions affecting their marriage. She tells him that protecting her would have meant giving her the truth early enough to respond. Hiding repayment conversations did not remove the pressure. The pressure stayed there, gathered weight, and returned when neither of them had control over the timing anymore. Sumit tries to explain that he never expected the cafe to fail the way it did. When he told his family he would return the money once the business started working, he believed success would solve the issue before Jenny ever needed to worry about repayment. From his perspective, there was no plan to place her in danger. He thought he was promising something he would handle himself once the business improved. Jenny hears the reasoning, but she also hears the assumption underneath it. Sumit made a decision based on a future neither of them controlled. The cafe did not succeed. The money did not return. The family did not forget the promise. And Jenny ended up sitting before a judge because one private message carried more weight than Sumit expected. Their argument begins losing volume, but the tension grows heavier. Neither of them is shouting now. Jenny speaks more slowly because anger has started turning into disappointment, and Sumit stops trying to defend every choice because he knows the explanation does not erase what happened. This quieter moment exposes the real distance between them. Jenny wants partnership before decisions become emergencies. Sumit often tries to solve problems privately until he believes he has something manageable to present. Those habits collide badly when money and family are involved. Jenny reminds him that she has already spent years adapting to uncertainty. She waded through resistance from his family. She lived through periods where their future felt fragile. She accepted that building a life together would require patience neither of them expected at the beginning. After all of that, she wants one basic form of security from her marriage. If something has the potential to affect both of them, she wants to know before someone else tells her. Sumit does not argue at that point. He admits he should have told her about the repayment conversation. The admission matters, but Jenny is not ready to treat one apology as the end of the problem because the court hearing has changed the way she looks at every financial discussion connected to the cafe. She starts wondering how many conversations existed around the business, who offered money, what Sumit said in return, and whether the relative in court was the only person who expected something back. That thought seems to reach Sumit before Jenny finishes explaining herself. His expression changes. The shift is small, but Jenny notices immediately because she has spent the entire day watching his face for signs of hesitation. She saw the same discomfort when the old messages came up in court. She saw the same pause when her name appeared on the Café account. Now the look returns while they are standing outside the courtroom, and Jenny knows before Sumit speaks that another piece of information is coming. Sumit starts carefully. He says the Café money was not the only financial help connected to his family. Jenny stops him before he goes any further. The relief she felt minutes earlier disappears. She wants him to explain exactly what he means because after everything they have heard inside court, the phrase financial help no longer sounds harmless. Jenny now knows that one person's idea of support might become another person's idea of debt, and she refuses to accept another vague explanation. Sumit tells her there was another family payment. Jenny stares at him because the timing feels almost impossible to process. They have spent hours dealing with one hidden financial understanding, one set of repayment expectations, and one argument about why she was never told. Now, before the first dispute is even resolved, Sumit is admitting another arrangement existed outside her knowledge. Her voice becomes quieter. She asks who gave the money. Sumit answers carefully enough to confirm the payment came through the family, but Jenny no longer cares about careful wording. She wants to know what the payment was for, whether repayment was discussed, whether there are more messages, and whether her name appears anywhere connected to that money too. Sumit tries to explain that the second situation is different. Jenny immediately reacts because she has already heard too many versions of different throughout the day. The first money was described as support. Then repayment messages appeared. Her Café connection seemed limited. Then an account carrying her name surfaced. Every reassurance has been followed by another detail changing what she thought she understood. Sumit insists he never meant for her to learn about any of this inside a legal crisis. Jenny tells him that intention is no longer enough. What matters is how many decisions were made, while she believed she knew the full financial picture. For the first time since leaving the courtroom, Sumit looks less defensive and more worried. He seems to understand that the second payment is no longer a side issue. After everything exposed during the hearing, another undisclosed family arrangement goes straight to the question Jenny has been asking all day. How much of their financial life has she only known in pieces? Jenny looks directly at Sumit and asks the one question he has been avoiding since he mentioned the second payment. How much? Sumit does not answer. How much? Jenny asks the question again because Sumit's silence has already started answering something else. The amount matters, but the deeper shock comes from learning there was another family payment in the first place. She has spent the entire day hearing explanations about money she believed was support, repayment expectations she never knew existed, and private messages she had never seen. Now, outside the courtroom where she finally received a small piece of relief, another financial secret is sitting between them before the first dispute has even ended. Sumit struggles to respond because this second payment changes the emotional meaning of everything Jenny heard inside court. The first dispute still has legal questions surrounding it. The judge has asked for more evidence before deciding whether the Café money created an enforceable loan. Jenny has been temporarily removed from part of the claim because there is not enough evidence tying her personally to the alleged debt. On paper, she has a reason to feel safer than she did earlier. But Jenny does not feel safe. A court ruling might eventually decide what Sumit owes his relative, yet no judge is going to decide how much secrecy their marriage is supposed to survive. Jenny now knows family money moved around them through conversations she did not hear, promises she did not approve, and expectations she only learned about once consequences arrived at their door. The second payment forces her to look backward. She remembers Sumit's expression when the court notice first arrived. At the time, his uncertainty seemed strange because Jenny expected him to dismiss the claim immediately. He did not. Then came his nervous reaction when questions turned toward old conversations. After that came the WhatsApp message where he promised to return everything once the business started working. Later, when Jenny's name appeared on the Café-related account, Sumit struggled again before finally insisting he would carry any responsibility himself. Each moment looked separate while it was happening. Now, Jenny sees a connection. Sumit was not only worried about one court claim. He was carrying knowledge about financial conversations Jenny had never seen. That realization hurts because Jenny has spent the entire case trying to understand what happened to the cafe money, while Sumit has been deciding how much information to reveal at each stage. From Jenny's perspective, this is no longer one forgotten message or one misunderstanding between relatives. She starts wondering how many promises exist outside her knowledge and whether every answer will lead to another hidden detail. Sumit tries to explain the second payment without making the situation sound larger than it is. He does not present the money as another courtroom claim. No new lawsuit has appeared. No second relative is standing before a judge demanding repayment. The payment belongs to a separate family arrangement, one Sumit believed he would handle privately. That explanation gives Jenny little comfort because she has already heard the word privately in too many forms. Privately is where the first repayment conversation happened. Privately is where Sumit wrote he would return the cafe money. Privately is where expectations developed without Jenny understanding them. Now, privately has become the place where another financial arrangement has been sitting. Sumit argues his intention was to keep pressure away from their household. Family discussions about money often carried emotional weight, and he believed dealing with those conversations himself would spare Jenny from more conflict. He did not want every offer of help to become another argument about his relatives. He thought separating those pressures from the marriage would make their life calmer. Jenny hears the explanation and sees the flaw immediately. A problem does not disappear because one spouse does not know about it. From her perspective, protection without honesty creates another kind of insecurity. She cannot prepare for an obligation she does not know exists. She cannot discuss a promise she has never heard. She cannot protect their finances if she learns about family expectations only after someone asks for money back. This is where their disagreement becomes less about who is right and more about how differently they understand responsibility. Sumit believes responsibility means carrying the burden himself. Jenny believes responsibility starts with telling the person whose life shares the consequences. Those two ideas have been colliding from the moment the court notice arrived. Sumit believed he could handle the family claim because he had made the repayment promise. Jenny ended up in court anyway. He believed the cafe account did not automatically place her at risk. Jenny still had to sit while lawyers discussed whether her name connected her to the debt. He believed silence would reduce conflict. Jenny now feels more uncertain because she does not know what else silence has been covering. The argument grows quieter again, but Jenny's disappointment becomes sharper. She is no longer reacting to one shocking document. She is thinking about the pattern. Every time she believes she has reached the full explanation, another piece appears. For Jenny, this matters because her marriage with Sumit has never been built in easy conditions. She relocated and rebuilt her life around a relationship many people around them questioned. She waded through family resistance. She tolerated uncertainty because she believed the two of them were eventually moving toward a more stable partnership. The cafe was supposed to belong to that future. Instead, the failed business has become a doorway into old family tensions Jenny thought they were learning to manage. She looks at Sumit and wants one thing now, a complete answer. Not another partial explanation designed to keep the moment calm. Not another reassurance based on what he hopes will happen later. She wants every financial promise connected to his family placed in front of her before another person, account, message, or court document exposes something new. Sumit understands why she is asking. His earlier instinct would have been to soften the situation and explain only what seemed necessary. That instinct now looks dangerous even to him. The courtroom showed him how quickly an informal family understanding could become evidence once people disagreed about what was promised. His WhatsApp message is the clearest example. When Sumit wrote about returning everything after the business started working, he says he was expressing respect and responsibility toward his family. He did not think he was writing a loan contract. He did not expect those words to appear later as evidence supporting a repayment claim. Jenny sees the same message from another angle. Whatever Sumit intended, the relative read those words as confirmation. The message created an expectation, and Jenny never knew the expectation existed. That difference stays unresolved because both interpretations still carry weight. The judge has not ruled the family money was definitely a loan. The missing formal agreement still matters. The lack of a repayment schedule still matters. The absence of clear terms still matters. Sumit's message matters too. The legal case therefore stays open. More evidence is needed. Jenny understands this means another court appearance, more documents, and more questions remain possible. Yet her attention has moved away from the legal result. When she walked into court, she feared losing money. Walking out, she fears losing confidence in what she knows about her own marriage. That shift changes everything. Money has a number attached to it. Trust does not. A debt can eventually be paid, rejected, reduced, or resolved through a ruling. The feeling of being kept outside important decisions has no simple calculation. Jenny is now asking herself whether the next surprise will arrive through another message, another family conversation, or another financial document carrying consequences she never agreed to face. Sumit finally stops trying to defend the way he handled every conversation. He accepts responsibility for keeping important discussions from Jenny. He admits she deserved to know about family obligations before any expectation reached their home. His intention to prevent conflict did not produce peace. It delayed the conflict until the stakes became higher. For Jenny, the admission matters because she has wanted him to understand this difference all day. She is not demanding control over every conversation Sumit has with his relatives. She is asking for honesty whenever those conversations create promises affecting their shared future. Sumit says he understands. The harder question is whether understanding arrives early enough. Jenny still wants to know about the second payment. She wants to know why the money was given, what Sumit said when he received it, whether repayment was ever discussed, and whether any written messages exist. More than anything, she wants to know whether this is the final hidden arrangement or merely the next one she has learned about. That question sits at the center of their marriage now. Does Sumit put every financial promise connected to his family on the table, even if the truth creates another argument tonight? Or does he return to the same instinct, revealing information only when he believes Jenny needs to know? For anyone watching their conflict unfold, this is where the debate becomes difficult because Sumit's intention and Jenny's experience are not the same thing. Was his repayment message simply a respectful promise to family, written during a hopeful period when he believed the cafe would succeed? Or is Jenny right to see the hidden promise as a breach of trust because financial expectations were created without her knowledge? That is the question worth answering in the comments because the court will deal with documents, evidence, and legal responsibility. The relationship has to deal with something harder. When money involves both partners, where does private family responsibility end and shared marital responsibility begin? Jenny does not look interested in debating intention anymore. She wants facts. The courtroom has already shown her what happens when assumptions replace clear conversations. One side believed the cafe money was support. The other side believed repayment was understood. Sumit believed his message expressed respect. The family believed it confirmed a promise. Jenny believed she stood outside the debt until her own name appeared on an account. Too many people believed different versions of the same arrangement. Now she refuses to leave another financial question floating between them. She looks at Sumit again. Her voice is controlled, but the pressure behind the question has grown because the answer now represents far more than money. How much? Sumit hesitates. Jenny waits. He looks toward her, then away, and for the first time the silence feels heavier than anything said inside the courtroom. No amount comes. The first court case exposed a disputed debt and forced old promises into public view. The judge still has not decided whether the family money was legally a loan, and Jenny has only temporary relief from part of the claim. But the number Sumit refuses to say carries a different threat. Because if one hidden promise brought Jenny into court, the unanswered payment might reveal a problem no ruling is able to fix for them.